Sit back, relax, and let's have a chapter chat. I'm your host, Jessica Foster, and today we are joined by New York Times bestselling author Susan Wiggs. Hi, Susan.
Jessica, thank you so much for having me. This is one of my favorite parts of a book coming out. I get to talk to actual people instead of fictional characters.
Right? It can be such a solitary thing, writing a novel, and then it's so nice to be able to communicate with readers.
Yeah, it truly is. And I kind of have two personalities. I've got the loner who likes to be alone in the room, with my stories. And but I love readers. I was a teacher, early in my career, and so I've always loved connecting with people about books and reading.
Well, we'll talk a little bit about that coming up in our interview because I want to hear more about your background. But I do want to dive into Wayward Girls because this novel, oh my goodness, people have gone crazy for it. And now it's out in paperback.
This edition of the book is really, really special to me for a couple reasons, but mainly because I was allowed to offer some extra material at the end of the book, and it's the book club edition. And so it's an opportunity for the author to really connect with readers maybe she's never met, but who are very real to me and dear to my heart because they've kept my career alive for book after book. And this particular book, since you've read it, we won't do too many spoilers, but this book has a lot of substance to it that's really meaningful in ways that I wasn't expecting when I was researching it. And I kept being very surprised by the situation that occurs in the book.
And this is historical fiction, and it takes place in the Vietnam era.
It's crazy to me that it's historical because I was around as a little kid, but still, it's in living memory for many, many of us. And, but it is historical fiction in that it happened in the past and had to be researched just like I would research, the Middle Ages or the Civil War or something like that. So I definitely treated it as I would any kind of piece that really needed a deep dive into the research.
And I always like to give just a brief synopsis for our listeners that maybe have not read the book to entice them to read it because it is one that you want to pick up and read.
Thank you. When I first pitched it to my publisher, I just said, rebel girls in a reform school in Buffalo, a really scary place. And it's a place that really existed. And so I was incredibly passionate that we could publish this book and bring their stories to the page. Yep, rebel girls in reform school, breaking up, putting their lives together, and taking some of them 50 years to seek justice.
And what made you decide to write something like this? Because there are some really difficult topics in this book.
There are, and many of my books are termed beach reads. I like to think they do have more substance. There's always some very deep-hearted issue in each book, but this one definitely had those dark threads, and it was one of those books. A lot of times, an idea comes to you and you don't know where it came from. This one had a very specific moment. I was in a little town in upstate New York near Buffalo. Where I hadn't lived since I was 10 years old. We moved overseas, and so I really hadn't seen the town. And I was with my older brother, and we went to this Catholic church where, that was our church when we were little. And I imagine most people have that moment when you walk into a place and memories flood back to you in a strange, especially it was an old Gothic church. There were smells and echoes and, certain things. It just tweaked my memory. And I looked over at my brother and I said, he was 2 years older than me. I said, did you used to be an altar boy? And he said, yeah, I was an altar boy one time. And he was the I'm not sure if you can picture in a Catholic high mass, there's a kid swinging this incense burner
Yes.
and scenting the air, and he proceeds down the aisle. That was my brother, but his sleeve caught on fire from the burning
Oh,
incense. And so he kind of had we had this recovered memory together. And I thought, the church is a powerful force, whether or not you're still a member of the church or anything. There are things that embed in you. And I just decided, to really do a deep dive into the impact of the church on an ordinary American kid's life. And it took me to this unbelievable institution in Buffalo called the Good Shepherd. And it was the place where they would send the bad girls, and, the girls who had unplanned pregnancies or who failed out of foster care or who were just difficult or maybe neurodivergent. I'm sure they didn't call it that back then, but it was a terrible institution, and it's still there. You can I think you can go to my Instagram feed, and there's a little video that shows what it looks like, and it looks like a big 19th century prison. And so that kind of led me down a path. And then there was another thing that I did. It was on Facebook. They have these groups that are around a shared interest, and there was one called Buffalo, and it was old lore about the city of Buffalo, New York. And I just posted a picture of the Good Shepherd, and I said, "Does anybody have any memories of that?" And that kind of connected me with some women who had survived that place and people who knew it in their neighborhood. And the next thing I knew, I was, I had these storylines that just would not shut up. And so I thought, okay, my next book won't be the beach read that some people, need to put in their travel bag, but I wanted it to be equally entertaining. So I hope that it was. I hope that there's enough moments of adventure and humor and uplifting moments that really kind of elevate the book from just being this dark and dreary reform school drama.
yes. And did you ever, when you were writing it, and I know that you get immersed in your characters, did you
Mhm.
ever have that heaviness when you were writing it?
I did, and it's tricky. It's kind of like, I imagine, I'm not an actor, but I imagine method acting would be where you need
Yeah.
to immerse yourself into the character in order to authentically let her play out on the page. So I definitely did that, and luckily, I have a lovely husband and pets, and I'm very into sports, and so I think a physical activity kind of transitions me from the world of the book into the real world. And so, that one, there was a lot of hiking involved. There was biking involved, but I actually had a horrible cycling accident last year, and so I've sort of retired the cycling until I heal from that. But no, I think for me, and probably for a lot of professionals who have sedentary jobs, the way to transition from the world of work to the world of your real life is to physically transition yourself. And I did a lot of that. I think I don't know, maybe I even lost weight. Who knows?
Well, I would think that you would have to kind of get out of that mental space and into a different mental space.
Well, and I picture people in your profession. You never know what story is going to come across your feed, and you might be having, the best day of your life, and then you come across somebody who's having the worst day of their lives. And for me, that's kind of a gift because I write fiction. But for people in your profession, sometimes that seems to me it would be even more of a challenge to shake. So, yay that you
Yes.
can go home and read a book or something.
Exactly. And it is. I've actually talked to someone recently about that. And they were, how do you deal with it and deal with what you hear or what people tell you? And you really have to compartmentalize it. A lot of times when I get home, if my family asks me about a story, I can't even recall the details of the story. But when I'm at work, I can. It's
Mhm.
very odd. It's almost like I just have to let it go when I'm not at work.
Yeah, and actually that turned out, and I didn't plan it this way, but it turned out to be a theme in Wayward Girls, is that these women endured this institution really for such a short period of their lives, a year, 2 years,
Yeah.
some of them were in there longer, but it defined the rest of their lives. So they had to figure out how to do that. How do I draw a line and say, yes, this happened, but I'm going to move on with my
Yeah.
life? And I wanted to really dramatize that in the book in different ways for the different women who were there.
And how is it now? I mean, of course, it debuted last year and now coming out in paperback. Tell me about the differences in that.
The hardcover release is the one, that's the one where the libraries adopt the book and, order the book. And libraries, thank God, have, kept my
Yeah.
career alive since 1987 when my first book was
Wow.
published. Um, and so the hardcover release is the debut into the world, but the paperback is the one for the people. Because that's the one that you can tuck into your luggage or your bag or put on your audiobook or something like that. And so this phase of the book also has the gift of having a year of feedback from readers, and there's always going to be all kinds of feedback. I'm sure there are some really um, negative reviews of it out there, but for the most part, I would say Wayward Girls, more than any book that I've ever written, had the most passionate and specific feedback. And I was really surprised because not everybody was around in 1968, but the young people who weren't around were very fascinated by it. This really happened. We did this. And people who were there were like, oh, thank you for mentioning my music and Tiger Beat magazine and all the little flourishes from popular culture of the time. And so it's been really gratifying and fun for me as the writer to either wake up some old nostalgia for the era or some rage for the era. I personally, I was really little then, but I had a favorite babysitter. I remember her name was Betty, and I thought she was beautiful because when you're a little girl, you think all big girls are beautiful.
Right.
And she just went away one time, and everybody, and where's Betty? She didn't babysit anymore. She just went away, and now I realize it was very likely an unplanned pregnancy, and she came back and didn't seem like the same bubbly Betty that I remembered. And so when I think, but I saw it through such a different lens as a child. Now I realize, that this was happening, and I was kind of a child of privilege. My parents were very, I don't know, they were protective. They were freakishly normal, thank God. And so I wasn't like aware that this was happening right in my world, right next door. And so I did get a lot of feedback from readers who either were aware of it or they weren't aware of it and they were shocked. And so I love that the paperback is out and giving people a chance to have these conversations.
And isn't it so sad to think that young girls were treated that way?
It blows my mind. And like I said, I was one of the lucky ones. I was
Yeah.
a kid that had the privilege of, good parenting and sensible schooling and things like that. But not everybody did. And it's really hard for people to understand. And so I think that's one of the roles that fiction can play is it can have, you can watch it play out, and hopefully in a book like Wayward Girls you can see how it can play out over 50 years, because the book does end in present day with, I hope, the right situation for most of the women. And I still look back and I think we did that. Somebody did that to kids.
I know.
And so it's, I don't know, there's some little bit of outrage, but there's also the component that says never again. We're not going to ever do this again.
And that's why historical fiction is so important. Because if we don't expose history, talk about history, remember what happened in the past, it can likely repeat itself.
Absolutely. And this one was such a it had such a long history. It was a Magdalen Laundry. I'm not sure some of your viewers might be familiar with them. They're better known in Ireland, and they're Catholic-run organizations for mostly unwed mothers, but also indigent women. They were workhouses, and they were called Magdalen Laundries because they did laundry there. They did some other chores, but it was fairly well known. They persisted into the 90s, some of these institutions. The Good Shepherd actually closed right around when it did in the book, right around 1970. It closed to being a Magdalen Laundry. It's been another kind of institution ever since. But it's shocking that, for 100 years or more, that place in Buffalo was where we put our young women, and that's what we did to them.
Yeah.
And then I guess the other thing that was pretty shocking to me was the irregular adoptions that happened. Somebody just suddenly, this childless couple suddenly had a baby, and the paperwork might not have been exactly proper. That happened a lot, and so there's a lot of drama, which is a gift to a fiction writer. It kind of sucks if you're the person, but
Right.
it gave the book a lot of substance and weight, but also enough drama to be a page turner, I hope.
Yeah, definitely a page turner, that's for sure.
Oh, was it? Okay,
It,
good. Thank
oh,
you for letting me know.
yes, it was a page turner. And I've seen
Oh,
a
that's
lot of,
good. That's such good feedback for the writer because when I'm writing the pages, it takes forever. I feel like I'm passing a kidney stone when I'm writing it.
yes.
So to hear the feedback that it kept the reader, engaged in the book, thank you for that feedback.
Yes, and a lot of reviewers feel the same way about it, that it was a page turner. So I think that you accomplished that goal.
Well, I also had really good editing.
Mhm.
At my publisher, William Morrow Books, an imprint of HarperCollins. My editor, Rachel, was such a creative partner with me on this particular book. Because also it was a bit of a plot twist for her to go from editing my feel good beach reads to something a little more dark, and so I she was a really powerful partner in that. Her creative feedback was great, as well as feedback from my literary agents.
And so now that you have some experience with both, do you have a preference and what are you going to be working on next?
You know what? I did. It's not, I don't know that it's going to be the rest of my career, but the next book that I'm really interested in, well, there's two. One of them is a contemporary novel, but it references a lot of interesting women's history in the past. And the one that I am getting started just this summer researching takes place in the 70s. So I'm back there listening to the music and pretending that phones were just phones.
Yeah.
So it kind of takes me back, and I'm enjoying that.
I like that you can immerse yourself in the times and listening to the
Mhm.
music of that era. You talked about being an educator, so let's kind of talk about your previous profession and how it led you into the profession that you're in now.
And it was actually the opposite. I was one of those, and writers can come to their profession at all walks of life. They can do it like I was a child. Even when I was pre-verbal, I was scribbling on paper and telling stories to my long-suffering mother, and she would actually write them down. And I know this because she saved a few. So I have some old one. It was always about putting the story on paper and telling stories. And so I always knew that I would write, but as I, became an adult and finished college and graduate school, I realized nobody's going to pay me to be an aspiring writer. And so I also come from a long line of teachers. My mother's a teacher, my sister was a teacher. Lots of women in my family were educators. And so my first job was as a school teacher in Texas. And I loved it. I was really good at it. I tried to be that teacher who was like the ones that I remembered. You know, I had that third grade teacher who told me, she said, if you want to be a book writer, you should be writing books. And she would, you know, give me all the materials, the stapler and the tablet. And, you know, I would like self-publish books in the back of her classroom. You know, I tried to always be that teacher, and I loved it. It was really a vibrant profession. But then when my book started selling, I had to kind of pick a horse and get on it. And I knew that I had to, you know, follow toddler Susan was, you know, already carving out her space in the publishing world. And so I became a full-time writer, but my teaching days were incredibly rich and fulfilling to me. And I don't know what I'd do without the teachers that I had. And so I hope that they are kicking back and having their summers, putting their feet up, reading a good book.
I know the teachers love to read good books, don't they?
They do.
And so were you writing once you would get home from work and just kind of writing on the
I had
side?
no life. I had a baby, and then, you know, toddler and little girl that I was raising, and I was a full-time teacher, and I just well, I was in my 20s, so that kind of helped.
Yeah.
But I just would stay up, you know, put the kid to bed, you know, open my notebook. One thing that I do that I thought all writers did, but turns out not many of us do, is I write all my books in longhand in notebooks. I don't type them up. My first draft is always a handwritten in a notebook. And so I would do that every night for hours and hours. And it was kind of the no sleep profession.
I love that you handwrite your novels. Do you still do that?
I do. And, you know, I've been reading lately that educators have started to not teach penmanship and cursive writing. And I'm kind of questioning that, because I think
Yes.
there's a kinesthetic connection between your brain and your hand as you're writing or drawing or doing anything with your hands on paper. I'm a little bit worried that something is lost if people don't learn that skill. But, you know, that's just my theory, but it feels very real to me. And it also, now in today's world, it protects me from being accused of generating something through AI. Because
Yeah.
there are, yeah, you know, now you can tell AI, you know, write me a book, and it won't be a good book, but it will maybe look like a book. I'm not sure. I've never really
Right.
tried it,
I
but
know.
I have my hard copy. You know, I was just writing when we logged on today, so I'm sure I'll go back to it for the rest of the day.
I love that. And how long does it take you to write your first draft?
Probably minimum 6 months, sometimes a year. And that's what I call the heavy lifting, because that's when you start with nothing and you've got to fill, you know, 100,000 words or more with this story. And then the next phase for me is it's not easy, but it's simpler, where I just I type up the words that I wrote, and actually now I read it aloud into my software so that I don't have to do so much typing.
But that's also a way that you can edit as you go.
It is. There was one time I find typing so tedious. I thought, well, maybe I'll just hire a service to render my handwritten manuscript into type. But I realized exactly what you said. I think, Jessica, you might have to have a book in you, because that's exactly how a writer thinks. I thought, well, it's my chance to revise this book, because it's certainly not perfect. When there's a handwritten draft, it really looks like a handwritten draft. You know, it's really a mess. And so it is another creative phase when you look back and you're like, that's the story that I told. And it's
Right.
not very good, but I can make it good. And here's what I'm going to do. And so, yes, definitely. It's, I think a typical book, you know, every writer's different, but a typical book, you go over it again and again and again. And I couldn't tell you how many drafts, because it's kind of kind of in fits and starts, but it's a lot more work. I've always wished that it burned more calories because I'm sometimes exhausted
I'm
when I get to
sure.
the end, and it's like, oh my God, I worked so hard on that and I didn't move a muscle.
Well, it's funny that you say that there must be a book in there because when I was a child, I would write all the time. And I used to say, I'm going to be a writer when I grow up. And then I ended up going into journalism where I do have to write a lot. But also, my lifelong goal is to eventually have a published book. So,
Well, then you just stated it aloud, and that's always the first step. I have to say, when I was first starting out, I wasn't super public about it. You know, there was no social media or anything, so I didn't have to worry about that. But I wasn't. I was really shy to let people know what I was doing. And so it was kind of fun to come out and say, well, you know, I wrote this book, and then the book comes out. But on the other hand, I think it probably held me back a little that I didn't declare my
yeah.
intention, because there's something about saying it aloud. And so I have no doubt that that's going to happen for you one of these days. It sounds like you're in a really busy time of your life, and sometimes you need to wait for a little lull in that or a hiatus in that. But when I teach writing, and I do like to teach writing sometimes in workshops and everything, and I just tell them, you know, tell the 10-minute story. You know, take
Yes.
these 10 minutes and get your cup of coffee and just write something.
I
And
love
you never
that.
know what it's going to turn into.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, I've always said I think that I owe it to young Jessica to have a book published because,
Keep the dream alive, Jessica. You can do it.
yes, because that's always what young Jessica thought. Now, I love my journalism career and it is such a passion. And that
Well, and you're
evolved.
writing a lot for journalism as well, right?
You are, yes. And that
Mhm.
my dream evolved into journalism when I became like a preteen and teenager. But, you know, there's
Mhm.
always that little thing that when you were a little girl that you dreamed about. And I want to make that come true too.
You do. You must have related to Odessa in Wayward Girls, that character. In my books, there's almost always a writer. You know, maybe she's not the
Yes.
main character, but she's a really important character. And sure enough, we saw the seeds of Odessa's eventual career, and it was a book that brought the team back together again, because you know, after they escaped from this reform school, they all went their separate ways, and the thing that brought them back was that the girl who became the writer was, I think she was on a podcast or something, and somebody heard and put two and two together and went, oh, we know her. And so it kind of all evolved from there. So I enjoyed that moment in the book when they realized that you know, many years had passed, but there are certain friends that you make in certain times of your life where you can go back and see them, and it's like no time at all has passed. And I
Yes.
tried to let that play out in Wayward Girls.
And I love that you say that because there are certain friends in your life and they serve a certain time period. And then maybe you lose connection and maybe you never gain connection with that person again. But then there are some that circle back around and life just has a way of working out that way, doesn't it?
It does, it does, and it was really a pleasure to write the book in such a broad on such a broad canvas, starting from, you know, when they were 15 years old, all the way until they were, you know, old, very wise old women. And so I really enjoyed that aspect of it as well.
Well, Susan, we have so enjoyed talking with you today.
Oh, thank you. This was fun. You're like the first real person that I've spoken to, because I'm working on a book, and so I've got, you know, fictional characters in my head. So thank you for keeping me grounded, and thank you to readers and librarians and booksellers for keeping books, you know, front and center in our lives, because we all can use more books.
Perfectly stated. Yes, I agree.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. You've been listening to Chapter Chat. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. And for more positive content, check out our supporter, the Be Sweet Y'all podcast by Karen Key Smith.